This is Rue Ziegler, and I'm at the home of James Hickey. Today is November 11th, and this is tape number 1 of the oral history interview of James Hickey for the Jack Davies Ag Preservation Fund. The year is 2008. Jim, I just wanted to start by asking you a few questions about your early life, where you were born.
Oh, well, I was born in Michigan, Saginaw, Michigan. It's a town north of Detroit, about a third of the way up the state. If you think of the state of Michigan as a mitten that you see on the map, Saginaw Bay is between the thumb and the finger there, and Saginaw is at the end of Saginaw Bay.
And why were your parents there?
Well, my father was working for the railroad at the time, Pierre Marquette Railroad.
And had lived there for quite some time?
Yeah, quite some time. I think, yeah, he was born in Saginaw. His parents came from Ireland.
Uh-huh. So, Jim, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your early education. You went to school in Saginaw?
Yes.
And what were your early interests as a child?
Well, mostly in those days, the big band. I was a trumpet player. I was going to make a lifetime out of music.
Really? I know you were also a football player.
Yeah, we had a very good football team. We won the state championship Class A in 1944.
So you're a musician and an athlete.
Oh yeah, we won the state track championship that year. I was captain of the track team and played on the football team and the basketball team in between.
And in the band, what was your instrument?
The trumpet.
The trumpet.
Trumpet player.
Was this a band for football games, or this was a school band, or was this?
Well, it was the school band, but I used to also play in a band that we did dances and things. But I learned early on that there were people with a lot more talent and a lot more resource than I did. So music became an avocation, not a vocation.
And did you have siblings? Did you have a large family?
Oh yeah, I had an older sister and 2 brothers.
And what were your first thoughts about college? Where had you wanted to go?
Well, I hadn't really planned that much on going to college because, remember, those were the war years, and you had to decide whether you were going in the Army, the Navy, or the Marines. College was something you thought about if you survived World War II. And my father had been in the Navy in World War I and convinced me that would be a good choice for my stint in World War II. So I joined the Navy, and practically the day I graduated, the next day I was shipped out for Great Lakes Training Station in Chicago, and spent about a year and 3/4 in the Navy, in the amphibious service in the Pacific Theater.
Now, what year did you graduate from high school and go into the Navy?
I went in the Navy in 1945, which was the end. I caught the end of the war. And within, among other things, part of the occupation force in Japan.
Let's back up for a minute because I forgot to get your full given name and date of birth.
Oh.
Your full name is James.
Yes, James H. for Henry and Hickey, and my birth was in May 29th, 1927.
All right, so you shipped out in 1945?
Yeah, I was. We were shipped out through San Francisco. The first time I saw the Bay Area was courtesy of the U.S. Navy. We were at a installation called Camp Shoemaker, which now is the Alameda County Santa Rita Prison Farm. It had some of those qualities when you were there in the service. They had barbed wire around it, and the barbed wire was pointing in, not pointing out. So that kind of gave you a clue as to how popular the place was.
And what were your first thoughts of the Bay Area as you saw it?
Well, I thought it was very impressive because you could run around all day wearing practically nothing, and that night, in order to stay warm, you had to sleep with all your clothes on and in your sea bag practically. And I thought that was ideal. You had the best of both worlds. I mean, back in Michigan, it's cold all day, and it's even colder at night in the wintertime. But out here in the Bay Area, it was kind of an ideal thing, and that kind of sticks in the back of your mind when you come home from the service and go back to the ice and snow.
Well, so how long were you this was just a stopover, of course, in the Bay Area.
Oh, yeah, well, I was...
How long were you here?
Well, I was long enough that I worked several weekends in the canneries down in San Jose. How you made extra money in those days is while you were sitting around the shipping barracks waiting to move out, they looked for people to work in the canneries because they needed help in those days. So I've never felt the same about fruit cocktail when I was shoveling those little white grapes. Doing that with a shovel kind of takes the edge off it. But it was an interesting time in the Bay Area.
How did you get to Monterey then?
Oh, well, they sent buses and hauled you down to work. And that was very popular among the personnel. And of course, for Liberty, you went into San Francisco. In those days, they still had the what did they call them? The electric trolleys and so on that you could ride for practically nothing. And as a service person in those days in San Francisco, they had places you could stay and all kinds of good stuff. So it was a rather for a young man from the Midwest, it was a whole new world.
And then you shipped out and you went to the Pacific.
Yes, the Pacific went out and I was on a repair ship. We repaired all kinds of landing craft, LCVPs, which were personnel, LCMs, which were tanks. You know that old thing about for every fighting man, there's 10 people maintaining him. Well, I was one of the 10.
And how long were you overseas?
Oh, I was overseas then for about a year and a half, or maybe a little less than that. And came back through San Diego and shipped in back to Chicago and was discharged from the Navy in Chicago.
So this would be now 1946?
46, 47.
Uh-huh. And when you went to San Diego, were you intending to come back to California?
No, I think I was like most servicemen. The first thing you wanted to do was get home. So I immediately opted to return to the hometown, and needless to say, found a job working for the local power company, and like PG&E, only it was consumer power in Michigan. And having worked for them for one summer, they told me, go get a civil engineering degree and we'll hire you for the rest of your life. So I went to Michigan State University. Then it was Michigan State Agricultural College, and only became a university many years later.
And where is that located?
East Lansing, Michigan. It's right in the middle of the state of Michigan.
Uh-huh. And I guess you didn't have to pay tuition because weren't you on the GI?
Oh, I was on the GI Bill. Yeah, that was the thing that made it possible for me to go to college. Was the GI Bill. I certainly owe the military for that one.
And I know your wife's name is Virginia. Were you married during this time at university?
Well, we went together for 4 years before I went in the service. She wanted to get married, and I said, we'll see what comes back after the war, because the shooting war was still on at the time I went in. And when I came back, we did get married. When we went to college, we had one child. So we went to college as a married vet. That was an experience living in the married veterans. Well, it was almost like being back in the military, only your wife was there, because they were just all barracks apartments.
This was married students housing?
Married students housing.
So I know you have 6 children.
5.
Total. 5.
We were going to have 6, but we quit at 5.
You quit at 5. But so that you had the oldest one was born while you were still under the GI Bill at school.
Yeah, well, actually, the youngest was born even before we went to college. So when we went down there, we had a 2-bedroom apartment in the married housing section.
Wait, you said your youngest one was born before you went
Yeah.
back to school?
Oh, yeah, because I worked for a while for the power company before I went to school.
Oh, right. So what year was this that you went back to school? Let's see, you were...
Well, I graduated in 52, and it took me 3 years, so it must have been 49, 48, 49.
All right. So your children were born, but you weren't married until you came back from the war.
Right.
So your children were born in the late 40s.
Right.
So you had them all very close together.
Well, yes and no. I mean, our oldest one is now 60. Our youngest one is in her late 30s.
So now, by 1952, you're working again.
Yeah. I was working for the city of Oak Park, Michigan. It was a brand new city. The city had been fighting the encroachment by the city of Detroit. The eastern boundary of the city was right up against the city of Detroit, and the city of Detroit was looking for a new airport site. And one of the places they were looking at was the city of Oak Park, and so Oak Park was very much concerned they weren't going to be the airport or the dump for the city of Detroit. So they were incorporated, and they wanted to do planning, and they wanted a plan that didn't include either of those projects.
And your degree was now in planning?
It was in in those days it was called landscape architecture, urban planning.
Uh-huh. So you were in Oak Park, but only briefly.
Oh, I was in Oak Park long enough to do complete the plan, and the city adopted it, and we built a series of green belts around the city's industrial area. This was a strip park that was probably 300 or 400 feet wide, and it ran all the way around the industrial park. And then we put them along the mile roads coming out of Detroit also. So we had strip parks around the industrial park and along the major highways coming out of Detroit.
And now what do you mean by strip park?
Well, I mean, you got a strip that runs the whole length of the back of the industrial development area, and it's in trees and grass and walkways and all that sort of thing. It's a narrow, long park, stretches either along the industrial area or it stretched along the side of the highway, almost like a park along the highway on both sides.
But now you were saying that you had green belts around the strip park.
Right.
So.
Well, I mean, the strip park is a green belt.
Okay.
It's the same. It's the same thing. Yeah.
Then, why did you go to Ohio?
Well, in Ohio, they were coming up with a concept of regional planning, and the regional planning was that cities like Oak Park incorporated for a variety of reasons, but they weren't always reasons that made sense from a planning or or solving a problem. I mean, you can't solve your problem in one part of a 93 city metropolitan area by what you do. You've got 92 other cities out there all making their decisions. So it was the beginning of regional planning, and I thought that was just the best idea that ever came along. And I was offered the job as the chief administrative planner for the first multiple county planning agency in Ohio. It was called the Tri-County Regional Planning Commission. It included the city of Akron and the two wing counties from Summit County as the city of Akron, and then you have Medina and Portage County. It was three counties about in the middle of Ohio. No, really up just south of Cleveland.
And was this in the early 60s?
Yes.
So this was a time when there was a lot of idealism and expectation about what regional planning could do?
Absolutely. The idea was that the region, rather than letting the state or the federal government come down with programs or proposals, that the people in the region working together in consortium could come up with a better idea and come up with a better plan and balance their water, sewer, transportation needs on an area-wide basis, as opposed to each one going its own way and hoping that the whole thing would hang together and work.
And did you find that regional planning was working at this stage of your career?
Well, we did have some problems with some of the local technical people. The county engineer in Summit County had a different idea on who should be running the show, and we were successful in getting the program underway, and we were successful in getting the concept and some of the programs initiated, but overall there was a lot of resistance to giving up any authority to an agency that the individual communities didn't control. They had to work together in order to maintain that kind of a balance, and some of them were used to just making their own decisions.
So you had already experienced a lot of the difficulties.
Well, yes, but I figured, that was only in the Tri-County. So, and at that point in time, the township, which was next to the city of Oak Park, was working on incorporation, and they wanted a planner to come back so that by the time the city was incorporated, they would be up and running with a plan similar to what had happened in Oak Park. So I took that job, and we moved back to the Detroit metropolitan area.
And was that just for a brief period?
Well, the incorporation was longer in coming than anyone had anticipated, and under the township form of government, every year when they adopted the budget, you had to put your budget before the public meeting, and they could vote you in or out. And since planning has a habit of making people angry, it got to be a rather shaky situation because the incorporation had stalled, and the township residents who didn't like what the planning program was doing were out to sink the program. So it lasted about maybe 2.5 years.
Uh-huh.
And it did incorporate, and it's a tremendous city. The first Midwestern major shopping center in those days. That was a brand new idea that was only really on the East Coast. And J.L. Hudson, who was the big department store in the Detroit metropolitan area, built the first shopping mall in that part of the country, and it was the Northland J.L. Hudson Shopping Mall. It was what you see all over today, but in those days it was a brand new idea.
Is it still there?
It's still there. It's still there and prospering.
So now in 1964, you were probably back in Michigan, but you then decided to come to California. Is that right?
Well, actually, I went from the job in not Oak Park, Southfield Township. I went back to Ohio and worked for another regional planning agency. Two regional agencies. One was located in Springfield, Ohio, and consisted of the county and the city, and I was director of that one. And then following that, I took a job in Canton, Ohio, as planning director for the county and three of the cities, Massillon, Alliance, and the city of Canton, plus the unincorporated area. And that was the last job I had in Ohio before I came to California.
So by that time, you'd had 12 years of experience
Yeah.
in regional planning.
Yeah.
And how did you happen to come to California? How did that transpire?
Well, it was a very profound experience. My wife and I were at a national planning conference at a cocktail reception, and they had posted ads on the wall for this job in the Bay Area. And she said, "Why don't you go apply for that job?" And I said, "No, I wouldn't even waste my time, because if it's that good, somebody out in the Bay Area would be interested." She said, "Well, why don't you do it anyway?" So I went to the room posted, and I got an application. I filed an application, and lo and behold, I got a call from them. They said, "We'll fly you out and do an interview and all that good stuff." So I thought, well, why not? So I flew out to the Bay Area and spent a couple of days in the Bay Area. At that time, the ABAG offices were in the Claremont Hotel, so they put you in the Claremont Hotel, and we talked about the program and this and that and the other thing, and then I came back and was still working in Canton, where I was now head of the transportation agency as well as the planning program and the building department, and I had outlived a couple of county engineers and some supervisors. I was one of the old timers already. And it was a pretty good job. And it was a kind of a nice place to live. And they were going to build a football hall of fame and all that kind of good stuff. And I got a call from the Bay Area and ABAG, and they offered me the job. Well, I'd had a very good day and been successful that day. And I told them, no, thank you. I appreciated it, but not interested. Well, apparently they thought I wanted more money. Because I got another call from them 2 weeks later, and they said, okay, we'll increase the salary and we'll pay the moving expenses. Well, I'd had a bad day. So I said, I'll take it.
And now just to clarify for our listeners, ABAG stands for the Association of Bay Area Governments.
Right, that's the 9 counties that surround San Francisco Bay. At the time of the creation of ABAG, there were 93 cities and 9 counties. And they worked as a single agency.
And how large was the staff at ABAG?
The staff for the planning program when I arrived was 1. I was the only one.